This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is Rishad Tobaccowala, and he has a new book, which is inspirational. Restoring the Soul of Business, Staying Human in the Age of Data. We all need these reminders every now and again. In a spreadsheet AI world with Boston Dynamics dogs sure to be on the prowl, tracking our every move through Skynet. It's nice, and Rishad does this. It's nice to be reminded of the human side, the art side, because that's not going away. We can be seduced by all the tech. We can be seduced by all these brilliant guys with Asperger's. But the social, the human, the spirit, the art is not going away. And that means in business too. It's going to be a combination going forward. It's not just going to be the spreadsheet mindset. Oh no, I'm not trying to discount the spreadsheet mindset, not trying to discount the AI mindset. It's going to be there. But don't let it scare you. There's a place for everyone. But hey, we've all got to step up and take some control. And my guest today does a great job of reminding us all. Without any further delay, let's jump right into my podcast with Rishad Tobaccowala. Right now, in this particular point in time in history, it sure seems like the spreadsheet has won. Let me quant everything. Let me count everything. Let me apply a venture capital mindset of 90% losers, 10% winners. Let's crunch the math. Let's get a positive mathematical expectation. And who cares about all those humans behind the numbers? It doesn't make a difference because we've crunched the numbers and we've made billions upon billions of dollars. Why do people matter so much anymore?
The reason people matter is primarily because business exists for people and people do not exist for business. As importantly, businesses that focus on their people and the numbers. In my book, I talk about the spreadsheet, which is what you've just discussed, another sort of concept, which is the story. The spreadsheet of a business clearly is the P&L, the data running through the business, and the metrics. And in today's data-driven age, it is growing more and more important. My issue basically is that it's become so important that it has eclipsed the other part of the business, which I call the story. The story part of the business is about its people, emotions, culture, etc. In my book, I show that businesses that focus both on the spreadsheet and the story do better than businesses that focus just on the spreadsheet, surprisingly. For instance, in a simple concept, which is airlines, which most people understand, two airlines, United and Southwest, 90% of what they do is completely constrained either by commoditized aircraft or FAA rules. But one does much better than the other. And the reason is they focus on the story and not just the spreadsheet, which is Southwest versus United.
Let's unpack that a little bit, because as you started to talk about airlines, and here I am sitting in Southeast Asia, and I'm thinking of several very fine airlines. I'm thinking of one in particular based out of Singapore, the national carrier Singapore Airlines. There is nothing like that in the States in terms of the customer service, the experience, the interaction with staff. Why don't we go back to Southwest and United and kind of throw in a little bit of Singapore Airlines and contrast and compare? Because when I look at something like United, I refuse to fly United long haul now. Honestly, I just can't do it. But there's a lot of reasons for that. Maybe I'm going off on a limb here, but I know, for example, that when you fly, if you work on United, they give those long haul flights to senior staff. It's a union company. The senior staff get the flights. And invariably, you end up with not such a nice experience compared to, let's say, Thai Airways or ANA or Singapore Airlines. Why don't you take some of my things that I've just thrown at the wall and run with it a little bit?
I have a strategy on airline selection, which is whenever you have a choice between two airlines, select the one that home base is more Eastern than the other. If you're selecting between the United States and Europe, select European Airlines. If you're selecting between Europe and the Middle East, select Middle East Airlines. And if you're selecting between Middle East and the Far East, select the Far East Airlines, particularly airlines like Singapore. And I was recently in Singapore and I flew Singapore. Then I also, because someone else was paying and they flew me on United, that contrast was pretty significant. The emphasis is as follows. The only thing that differentiates the two airlines are two things. There's a little bit of hardware, which is until recently, United's, let's say, business class or other seats was somewhat 5-10 years behind. But now they've sort of introduced their Polaris concept, which is not bad. So if you sort of see the physical Singapore airline business class versus the United business class, they're almost similar now. Even there, they've caught up. But still, the experience is so very different. The experience is very different because of two very simple things, which is one, the people, which is everybody you interact with in Singapore actually believes that you matter, versus most people who you interact with United basically believes you are some sort of impediment to them going home and having a beer.
You're lucky that you're on United Airlines is the attitude.
Yes, you're lucky on United Airlines. And hey, by the way, we are going to get you from one place to the other. One clearly is the people that you are dealing with. But the second one, which you don't see, which is one of the reasons why it's the people that you're dealing with, is the management of the company. One's management is basically comes from a hospitality background. The other's management comes from a operational and often sort of logistics background. In one place, it is we are looking after passengers, members, and guests. And in the other one, we are basically shipping human cargo. Once you begin to have the mindset, but that human cargo mindset doesn't stop with regard to the passengers, it also implicates the people who work there, because the people who work there are also treated like cargo. One of the reasons the folks at United get so worked up is because they don't like their jobs. They don't like their management. So if you don't like your job and you don't like your management, it shows. A lot of people basically say, if you actually focus on customers will say positive things and you'll be doing well. I do believe that, but I also believe more important than customers is you focus on talent. You can see this in category after category. So I'm just going to go away from airlines and I'm going to basically go to any part of the world. So I'm going to now sort of go still Western, which is Costco versus Walmart. The difference between Costco and Walmart and why Costco does better than Walmart is because they actually care about their people. If you look at any category, if you actually care about the talent, the management actually believes that talent, culture matters, those companies tend to do better. And that's a big part of what I believe the soul of a business is, the human beings, the culture, and the people, and the emotion.
It's so obvious when you lay it out. If the staff at any particular company that we're interacting with, if the staff is treated nicely, if they're treated with respect, they're cared for, and they really love what they're doing, surprise, surprise that the customer service experience that we receive on our end is going to be better.
Exactly. A lot of what I focus on in the book in certain chapters is we have sort of underestimated the importance of humans and people. What we don't seem to understand is that the spreadsheet is the scorecard. It's not actually the ball. If you play tennis, you play by looking at the ball. You don't play by looking at the scorecard or the score. To a great extent, spreadsheet-driven businesses so much care about just the scorecard that they forget what actually drives the scorecard.
Let's go to an example that people will relate to. and I'm not going this direction to speak unkindly, but I think the richest guy in the world right now runs a little website called Amazon, and quite successful, kind of went sideways for a long time and then all of a sudden took over the world. If I was to think to myself, what is the positive story that I know in my head about Amazon? Well, it's Jeff Bezos' brilliance. It's all these great decisions that he made. And it stops there. Then every other story is about warehouses with repetitive motion issues with staff, and what really seems like kind of a race to the ultimate arbitrage, which I guess would be the end of people. I mean, it seems like it's a business that is doing exceptionally well, but it doesn't seem to at least give off, at least in my understanding, it doesn't give off anything about customer service that I can really relate to, other than they do an exceptional job of obviously getting you your package. And if you ordered something, it generally gets there on time. You get what you want. But I just wonder about the overall picture there. Am I going in the wrong direction by bringing up Amazon?
You aren't going in the wrong direction, but I'll sort of adapt something to you, which is this. I actually, about a year ago, had the opportunity to speak to a few hundred people at Amazon at their invitation. At the end of the conversation, it was about a different topic, but at the end of the conversation, one of their very senior folks, and this was November of 2018, so about 14 months ago, one of the very senior folks basically said, "Hey, Rishad, you haven't talked anything about what you think about Amazon." I said that was not in my brief, so I stuck to the brief. No one asked me to talk about Amazon. This gentleman basically said, "Could you tell us what you think about Amazon?" This was my answer, which I believe continues to be the correct answer 18 months later or 14 months later, which is I asked them to sort of look behind me, and the only thing that was behind me was my email address and my Twitter handle. So I speak without notes. My Twitter handle is @Rishad, and my email is rishad@gmail.com. I said, when you see that, what do you think you see? I said, what you're seeing is an early adopter. Only an early adopter has those things, unless you have a really strange name, and my name is not that strange. In effect, I said, I was basically utilizing Amazon before most of y'all were in high school, because it was around for 20 years. So let me tell you something. As a consumer, I absolutely love Amazon. I absolutely love Amazon because it gets me selection, low prices, great service, everything else. However, as a citizen, I'm not so sure. And that's the difference. What tends to basically happen is I also believe that Amazon is held in high regard by consumers. You can see the consumers rate it extremely high. But what tends to happen is you and I are more than consumers. We are fathers, mothers, nieces, nephews, uncles, aunts. We live as citizens. We're parts of communities. That's where they have failed. Then I basically told them a couple of things which actually turned out to be true. I basically said, listen, you all are, at that particular time, they just crossed $1 trillion valuation, and Bezos had become the richest person in the world. I said, you all are the highest market cap or close to the highest market cap company in the Western world. You are run by the richest person in the world. And you are basically going into all kinds of cities, including Chicago, asking for handouts so people can move, that you can create your headquarters to or whatever. I said, let me tell you something. You've gone to 225 cities, and what you're actually doing is you're basically getting data for your business. You have no interest in being in any of these cities. I will tell you exactly where you are going to end up. You are going to end up in one or more of the following 4 cities. And I said, Austin, Atlanta, New York, and Washington, D.C., and my bet is it's New York and Washington, D.C. Guess where they ended up? Though eventually they didn't end up in New York. It was Washington, D.C. I said, you all think you all are so smart that you'll have turned out to be stupid because everybody understands what you all are up to. That's the issue, which is the idea, for instance, of them suddenly raising minimum wages. I said, you all didn't raise minimum wages. You all did this exactly in December because you all realized that you all needed to have, or November, you needed to have a lot of people for the Christmas rush. You basically competed and you paid for that by offsetting some of their other benefits. The reality of it is that as a company that needs to think broadly, you are not understanding the community aspect, and there is going to be backlash. Now, there is backlash because the real constraint there is something else. Anybody who basically works with Amazon, let's say you are Birkenstock or anyone else, you begin to realize that you have lost all control of your business. Think about a marketplace with the following things. So Jeff Bezos owns the marketplace. He owns the signs in the marketplace, which is called the search engine. He owns all the information about the marketplace, which is the data. And he owns the customers who go into the marketplace. Therefore, what does a brand or a marketer do? They're nothing. That's what you're beginning to understand, where Amazon Basics and Amazon other things are basically competing with everything. That's the problem. The problem simply is focusing on the consumer is not alone enough. And that's one of the reasons now there's changes in antitrust law. There's a lady called Lena Khan, who's now working for, I think, the FTC. She basically has rightly said, you must consider whether a company is doing good or not just basically on how well it deals with consumers, but the impact it has on competition. And that's the key thing, which is they want to destroy all competition.
Whew, you said that on their turf?
Yes.
Wow.
Because I truly believe they're an amazing company that has started to lose the plot. 14 months later, you're beginning to see big issues where people are questioning Amazon. What tends to basically happen, eventually what they will do is they will basically spin off AWS, because that's where all their profits are, as its own company. That's what Scott Galloway of Pivot and NYU fame basically says. In fact, he calls Jeff Bezos the greatest welfare queen of America. Because if you actually think about the fact that they pay no taxes, Walmart basically pays huge amounts of taxes and Amazon doesn't. When you think about this huge company, highest market cap, by the way, that's happening a lot in technology, Apple avoids a lot of taxes. That's the key issue, which is when you begin to have a society where some people believe it's only them that matter and society doesn't matter, you begin to have massive backlash. In fact, as I mentioned in this book in my first chapter, I gave a talk in Jan 2018. So after I did this thing in Amazon World, on Jan 2018, I spoke at a conference called Ad Exchanger. It's a big conference in New York. There are about 700 people in the audience, and many people from Facebook and Amazon and Twitter and clients. I basically said, hey, look, the 5 most valuable companies today are data-driven. But what's very, very important, and we've created great wealth and we've created great stuff. For instance, I love the fact that we basically have Google search, and we got Google, and we got the Apple phone, and we got Amazon. I think the world is better off for it than not. But I said what we've also done as a group of people is we've given rise to 3 other things, which is polarization, inequality, and the complete breakdown of trust. You see that today on something like a Facebook. In effect, you have no idea what is actually happening today on Facebook, whether it's true or not. Facebook says, we're just going to collect the money, we don't care. Let the government decide. A lot of these people basically say, we won't fund the government, we won't pay any taxes. But when we have to make a hard decision, we want the government to decide. Choose. Don't be duplicitous like this.
Let me keep it at Amazon for just a quick moment to relate a personal experience. My first book came out in 2004. It ended up doing quite well. Frankly, because of Amazon, because I was a no-name author at the time. I sold tens of thousands, probably upwards of over 50,000 books on Amazon. So I would not have an author career without Amazon. But it came kind of carrot and stick because I quickly learned about the review process. Somebody wants to write a review on your book. And as every author knows, the review process at Amazon is really brutal because basically somebody can walk in and just say, you're the devil, or make some outlandish comment. The only recourse you have is to go down and participate in the comments section and say, oh, no, I'm not. Of course, in the land of trolls, if you say, oh, no, I'm not, 1,000,001 trolls jump right in. It's a really brutal process because here, looking at your book right now, you write your book. Some people aren't going to like it. Okay, great. If somebody gives a fair take at it, fine. But if somebody starts going personal and crazy, and you have no recourse, it brings me back to the comment you said a second ago, which is, I'm nothing. And that's what, as an author, I feel like to Amazon, I'm nothing.
Well, to Amazon, anything that isn't Amazon is nothing. They believe, obviously, in their consumer. So they do believe that me as a buyer is something, But me as anything else, supplier, employee, contractor, community member, we're sort of nothing. Completely nothing, maybe exaggeration, but we're sort of nothing. They are monomaniacal in this focus on let us make sure we look after our consumer and we don't care about anything else. As a consumer, as I said, I love that, but there are other things to worry about. That is, I think, what they're beginning to sort of think about. And by the way, the businesses that they're moving into, at the speed at which they're moving into the businesses, is pretty radical. I did not go to this year's Consumer Electronics Show, but I've been following some of the summaries. One of the key things is Amazon everywhere. Between their Fire and Alexa, they're permeating everything. When I read analysis of future industries, whether it's 5G, cloud, anything, they're everywhere. That's the really interesting thing. When you have companies that are so rich, so powerful, I think to a certain extent, maybe governments are nothing. That's a big, interesting issue.
Let me take you to an angle here, and this is a very big picture. Probably should have been the opening question, but I want to talk about a little bit about analog and a little bit about digital. I want to use an example in my mind of music. And so if I go back and let's say I would have been a young kid at the time, but if I look at music in the 1970s, a lot of the most popular music kind of had this passionate edge, and it was authentic and it was real and it had soul to it, whether it was rock or country or folk, you name it, 60s, late 60s, throughout the 70s. There was just something to it. It had an edge. Now, if I roll forward to today, a lot of young people today love EDM. To me, EDM doesn't have any of that. I wonder, as we start to break apart the notion of authentic and we start to look at analog and we start to look at digital, it really makes a difference when we look at this topic, depending on how old you are, doesn't it?
Part of it depends on how old you are, but let me build a case for why older people like us may be clueless. One of the key things is this new world. I mentioned in my book, because I sort of see how my daughter makes movies today versus what movies were made. Because of a lot of the new technologies, which are digital technologies, more people have voices and there are fewer gatekeepers when it comes to producing. So in the old days, making things was very difficult unless someone allowed you to make it, whether it was music or whatever, movies, etc. But now what's begun to become extremely difficult is actually getting people's attention has become incredibly difficult. What people tend to do is we have so many choices. Like today, I just read that in 2019, 1 trillion songs were streamed. 1 trillion songs. The difficulty in life is choice. And so today you can produce, all of us can produce, but it's really, really hard for us to actually be sort of seen or heard. There again, if you remember the old radio payola where you paid to get your song played, now the new radio payola is basically how much money you give Amazon or Google or Facebook so your message can be heard. What's basically begun to happen is the new payola is Google, Facebook, and Apple. As a result, what people are beginning to do is they're speaking to audiences that are as generic and as non-customized as possible, which is to your point, where things look, whether it's EDM or everything else. In fact, to a great extent, 70% of the money anybody who makes it in music makes it not from music, but from merchandising and selling tickets. Music itself has become nothing but a commercial. That's what you're basically saying. Everything has become commercialized.
I guess the angle that I'm going at too is kind of unpacking this notion of authentic, because I think perhaps for those that have an analog understanding, they have a feeling, and maybe they can't even describe what they're really looking for, but I think what they're looking for is the authentic experience. They're looking for the word that's on the front of your book, which is soul, because soul moves us. We'll do anything for soul. We'll pay anything for soul. Soul feels good. If I flip on Netflix, which is a fabulous selection, you can go through a million things at one time, but the vast majority of stuff that I see on Netflix, unless it happens to be Scorsese's Goodfellas, a lot of it just seems like they've created stuff that they think will fit my particular archetype, but there's no soul to it.
Well, what tends to happen is because they're producing a lot, Their whole stuff is we're going to put a lot in the wall. We're going to look and see what the data, which is this digital and data, and then see what actually works. I would say I'm going to go a little off Netflix, and I'm going to actually look at two things because I had this experience 48 hours ago. Recently, I was in India, so I came back from India. And as a result, I was getting up very early in the morning for the first 3-4 days. 2 days ago, I basically watched a show. I don't know if it's available in Vietnam. It's called Watchmen. It's on HBO. It's basically a show which is sort of like a sequel to the actual comic book, which was a graphic novel in the 1985. In the morning, I watched Watchmen, and I watched episodes 7, 8, and 9. They're some of the most remarkable, soul-driven, fantastic storytelling that you've ever seen. It's amazing. Later that evening, I went and saw Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. I walked out of The Rise of Skywalker because I realized that the whole thing was nothing but merchandising. The problem simply is it isn't just Netflix. It's basically what has tended to happen is everything has basically become data-driven business results. Once in a while, something stands out and people say, oh my God. Really, it is when it stands out. There's a South Korean movie that won at Cannes and just won the Golden Globe for Best Foreign Film called Parasite. And I saw that yesterday. I said, now think about that versus Star Wars. Star Wars was great, episode 4, the first one, then maybe episode 5. Then after that, it's basically become machine-driven.
There's enough young people that are not discriminating enough who will take it in, but Disney has made the decision that they don't care whether or not me in my 50s or you watch it. They don't care about us anymore. They've made the decision on the demographic they want. The data has told them who they want, and they don't care whether or not I feel anything authentic from Star Wars. And even though I loved the original ones and grew up on them, I don't care anymore.
Exactly. And so what tends to basically happen is, to your point on Soul, I sort of say, hey, look, we are living in a silicon-based, digital, data-driven world, which gives rise to great benefits, but it also gives rise to lots and lots of stuff that sometimes, and more than sometimes, is crap, noisy, untrue, etc. However, we as human beings, this is to your point, are not basically digital, we're analog. We're not silicon-based, we're carbon-based. We're not data processing, we're actually feeling human beings. I try to remind people that people choose with their hearts and they use numbers to justify what they just did. If that wasn't true, 2 of the 5 most valuable companies in Europe would not be luxury brands. Kering and LMVH are 2 of the 5 most valuable companies in that part of the world. To a great extent, people actually desire matters, story matters, and feeling matters. Obviously, my book is about the impact in business, but to a great extent, as you've seen in the book, I'm actually pro-technology, but I say it's spreadsheet plus story, digital plus analog. My concern is when we lose the analog, when we lose the people, we lose the story, we actually lose the plot that the world exists for us versus we are just sort of cogs in some sort of machine, which is number one. But as importantly, companies that do that or people that do that or leaders that combine the two tend to be more successful. It's not even just necessarily a diatribe or gerrymand against the existing world. It's just, hey, the existing world could be better, or companies that do it better combine the two.
I'm looking at your front cover as it says, staying human, the word human, larger type, in the age of data, the word data much smaller, but not any less emphasis. Let's stay at that word data for a moment, because I think every day that goes by, young or old, experienced or not experienced, our understanding of what data is and how data is being collected probably needs to update every day, doesn't it?
Yes. What is tending to basically happen is because there is so much data, also because data has become the common currency. When people say learn Mandarin, I said, forget about Mandarin. Google Translate will translate all that. Learn code if you need to, or understand how data works around. But the issue with data is, as I explained to people, and you obviously with your background know this, but I sort of simplify. In the book, I sort of note that algorithm is nothing but opinion embedded in code. That's what I sort of quote somebody who says, algorithms are nothing but opinion embedded in code. To a great extent, Data can be unleashed both for you and against you. You need to understand that. To a great extent, just because there is a number doesn't mean that the number means anything or is right or wrong unless you interrogate it and understand. To me, one of the big issues is not that data is more important, it's going to grow important, which it is, and it's the currency of the world and people make decisions on it. But people basically now sort of look at it without actually questioning it, without understanding that there is more to it. My biggest concern with everything is this. My undergraduate degree is in advanced mathematics, and I went to a business school at the University of Chicago, and I learned finance, and those two things are, therefore, I'm not an anti-math, anti-data person. However, I've always built my career in a way that I never have to compete with machines, because a machine will beat you because they know how to compute. My biggest concern right now when everybody thinks about data is, I said, if you come back and you give me a recommendation based on what a machine told me or told you, what exactly value do you add? That is the big issue. When you go back to that Amazon question, if your human role is just to move things from one place to another, you will be replaced. If we replace lots of people without training them or providing some sort of society, then this data-driven world will basically become data-driven but no humans. The other part that I always worry about is most of whom in the Western world drives technology. Obviously, there's huge amounts coming out of China and India. But in the Western world, most people who are driving a lot of the future of data and industry are approximately between 25 and 40 years old, live in the West Coast of the United States, and are Caucasian. In effect, they're solving problems which they have. For instance, having scooters and delivery are not actually worldwide problems or anybody's human problems. They're basically these people's problems. That's the other thing, which is they look at some near-term data and they don't look beyond. Big part of what I say is I never accept data without actually interrogating it, imagining what it could mean, iterating it. We are not training anybody. So what we're training people to do is to read the data and respond to the data, but not actually understand how to deal with it.
Well, the understanding takes human.
The understanding takes human. That's the difference. As I basically tell people, you start with a thing called data, and data does not mean fact. So most people confuse that data is a fact. Data is not a fact. Data is a number. That is one thing. So why don't you start with data? At the higher level of data is you have information. A higher thing from information is insight. You don't go from information to insight without human beings. But more importantly, what's good is the insight without it actually being an idea that helps people, drives a business, improves life. That, again, requires human beings. What we're always focusing on is the data and information loops versus the insight and idea loops. And companies that differentiate, people that win eventually are the insight and ideas. How do you take the data and the information and bring human perspective to it to solve real problems?
Let me take you back for just a quick side tangent. You mentioned learning Mandarin. You said, well, Google Translate will take care of that. I know why you said it. You said it more as a speed thing in terms of just being efficient. But on the flip side, if I'm at a local watering hole with Chinese businessmen at 12 a.m. at night in Beijing, and if I'm a white guy and I can speak Mandarin, my chances for business, based on that direct human contact, human connection, my chances for doing business with them just went up by some kind of score that I can't really measure.
Yes, but there's something else that actually went up. And the reason is something else. It's being with them at 12 a.m. in the watering hole.
Now, I'm not saying I've ever done anything like that.
No, but what I'm basically saying is this. One of the chapters in my book is have more meetings.
Why is that? I saw you say that. Why more meetings?
So here's why. We spend a lot of time trying to basically eliminate meetings. The reason we try to eliminate meetings is because most of the meetings we go to are useless. There was no reason to have the meeting. We go to meetings with the following three things. A, there are more people in it than people that need to be there, because now today in the world of Slack and a whole bunch of other things and the ability to sort of dial in or Skype in, people can be there. So one is you have these large meetings where most people don't need to be there. The second is everybody looks at a screen looking at numbers that they could have read. Third, most people are actually scared of saying anything, so the meeting is actually play acting. The real meeting happens at other times, not in the meeting. So that's one reason. We are trying to eliminate meetings. It's not that a meeting is a bad thing. It's that we don't know what meetings are anymore. That's one. The second, to a great extent, is we go to meetings with this horrible mindset that do not go to a meeting unless you can extract value. I believe you should not go to a meeting unless you can add value. Once you keep those two in mind, I change what meetings look like. And I say everything I've learned about is that human contact, interaction, conversations actually build business, build rapport, build trust, build understanding, and build ideas. I said the type of meetings we should go to are meetings like where we have conversations where I can help you or you can help me, conversations about where I say you suck or you tell me I suck, meetings which have no agenda, we just go have a beer, meetings where we speak truth to power. Those are real meetings. So for instance, the meeting that you had or will have or may have not had at 12 a.m. in a watering hole, what was really important is two parts of it. I believe 80% of the success of that was you were with them at 12 a.m. in a watering hole. 20% of it is that you spoke Mandarin. Because in effect, I've been to China in a period of about 5 years. I went to China 4 times a year, and I've been to 22 cities in China, 2 tier 3. I did not know Mandarin, but I built great rapport because their whole stuff was 2 things. You hang out with us, but more importantly, you respect our culture. You're trying to understand. So I would always go to a city and say, show me around. Tell me what's going on. Tell me about what's going on. So it was a human understanding, and then the business flowed out of it.
As we're talking about this, just one little side tangent also, as you're talking about connecting with people, especially this really applies Japan, China, all the way down Southeast Asia. Me, as a white guy, when I pick up chopsticks, I don't care what Asian country I'm in, the fact that I can pick up chopsticks, use them proficiently, is one of the single best connectors I've ever seen. It's absolutely amazing. They do not expect a white guy to be able to use chopsticks at all. And if you can, people's eyes light up. It's the craziest thing.
It does light up. And what tends to happen is that's the key thing. Because in effect, what you're basically saying is, I've learned something that's important to your culture. I like your food. It's basically a combination of empathy. So what tends to happen is every time I would go to China, people knew how much I loved the food. So they would basically figure out, I'd say, what's interesting locally, because I began to realize that there were local variations, not just fish and vegetables, but there were like variations. That was also a sign of respect. Hey, you're asking us. So they actually showed off what was local. And there is a thing that if you actually look at it, and this goes back to the United versus Southwest, a very simple word is pride, which is you want to feel proud. And proud not, hey, I'm great, but my company is great, my culture is great, where I come from is great. And when you have mutual pride, which is each person interacting with each other, makes a very big difference. The other thing that happens in these meetings is what is not said. A lot of what is not said, like for instance, when you use your chopsticks, you don't have to say anything. So what is not said? And tone of voice is a big, big thing. These are the things that we're not paying any attention to. That's why people find meetings horrible, because it's about shit that you could basically look at a screen and you didn't have to go to a meeting.
I have to add one more point as this conversation goes this direction. On eating, I would argue that as long as one feels comfortable about the safety of the food, that it's clean, whatever like that, as long as you feel comfortable about that, one, in whatever country you're in, should eat anything, because those people are eating it. And that means the culture, the people, whatever, they must be doing pretty good with it. You have to trust that. If you trust that, I'll eat anything in any country. I don't care. Just bring it to me. I'll eat anything. That is another little element here beyond chopsticks. Don't ask what is it if you don't know. Just try it. It's not going to bite you, you know?
Oh, absolutely. And so one of the key things when people would ask it, the only question they ask me, and I say, no, I'm fine, is sometimes they will always ask the guy, are you allergic to anything? I said, no, I'll eat anything. So it's just allergies, the only thing. So as you said, as long as it's safe, but I completely agree with that. And what tends to basically happen is everything eventually becomes human. And oddly, in my book, which I pull out how Jeff Bezos does a lot of human things all the time. What's particularly interesting, he basically says that he makes a lot of decisions on anecdotes, that people will provide him with data, but he'll listen to an anecdote and he'll say, can you now provide me with data that supports the anecdote? Because I don't believe what this data is. Go answer this particular question. Oddly, and he also constantly talks about the importance of story. In a very strange way, he actually is trying to do a lot of these things, but for some reason, it's got lost in translation.
As we wind down, and I've taken you on several tangents, there's a couple key topics, big picture areas. I mean, people are going to have to go jump into the book and get into the really nitty gritty. I just kind of wanted to wander you around some of your big picture today. But a couple statements that I really like. Change sucks.
Yes. The reason I say change sucks is because if you notice, when most people come to tell you to change, I usually tell them, I'm happy. If you think change is so great, why don't you change? But it's really interesting. People tell you to change and the change is good, but they themselves don't change. The reason is because when you have to change, you don't know what you're doing. And when you don't know what you're doing, you look foolish, you trip, etc. And most of us, as we become successful in our companies, in our careers, we don't want to look foolish. Because change requires us to do new things. It's like learning how to cycle or swim. You sort of almost drown or fall. I basically believe, therefore, change sucks. But I've also begun to realize that the more you want things to stay the same, the more you will have to change. Because if you don't change, you will become irrelevant, and that's even worse than change.
Change sucks doesn't mean to avoid change, run from change. It's just acknowledging that it sucks.
Acknowledge how difficult it is. And that's what most companies don't acknowledge, which is why they find it very difficult to change. Change only happens through people. You can either upgrade people or you can upgrade people's mindsets and skills. There's no other way for companies to change. And because you therefore have to deal with analog, carbon-based feeling people, we don't like it.
In this modern age also, as we talk about data today, there's another word that features prominently in your book, which I really love. I love it a lot more as I get older because I see so much hidden value in it. But the word art. Art is so valuable of concept. And it's like, I think in our modern age, people lose track. I mean, you talk about, hey, okay, anybody's got a camera, they can go become a director and get a show on Netflix. Okay, fair enough. But art is so damn important. And art is one of the keys to finding the soul.
It is. And that is one of the chapters in my book. The original chapter was called The Importance of Art in Business. We sort of revised it to inserting poetry into the PowerPoint, but it's basically about art. And there are three parts of why I celebrate art. The first is for people who are very interested in entrepreneurism and change, etc. I truly believe that artists are the ultimate entrepreneurs. They start with a blank sheet of paper, an empty room, a solid block of stone or wood, and they create. Artists basically transform, artists overcome risks, and artists can basically have insights and get to the core of an issue. It's one of the reasons why art is so important. But the other reason that art is so important is we tell stories in order to live. All of us as human beings, whether we're companies or individuals, make sense of the world through narrative and storytelling. In effect, if you want to change people's mindsets, change people, reinvent companies, you can best do it through art and through storytelling. Finally, most companies are really going to be driven into the future by something called innovation. And I define innovation as fresh, insightful connections. And without exposure to art, it's very hard to have fresh, insightful connections.
I think when you have that artist bent, you have more confidence. When you feel like you can create, it's almost like being out in the Stone Age. You can make fire. You can make fire. You feel like, you know what? I'm invincible. I can make fire.
Exactly. And that becomes very, very important. And so a lot of people have basically said, like what you mentioned, both the importance of the challenge of change, as change sucks, the importance of art. And there's a third one that people like, which I think you've you've seen, which is a chapter called The Turd on the Table.
I think that was the beginning of our conversation, was you putting the turd on the table, wasn't it?
Putting the turd on the table, exactly. But what tends to basically happen is this morning, night for you, morning for me, a lot of the newspapers talk about the internal memos at Boeing, where people basically were making fun of the FAA and misleading them. And about 3-4 months ago, I basically said, we will figure out that Boeing has a Wells Fargo problem, that their entire system was now based on getting the 737 MAX out as fast as possible because they had to sort of catch up with Airbus Neo. And we will figure out that they went so spreadsheet driven that they forgot what business they were in, which has become very extremely important. The stir on the table is important not only because of truth to power, but it's also important because of something else that is spreading around the world, which I believe is extremely important, but people haven't figured out. There's a little thing that they're forgetting, which is diversity. Diversity is extremely important because without diversity, you don't have innovation, you don't have fairness, you don't have a whole bunch of other things. But part of this stir on the table, which isn't in the book, but as I've been talking about it, I came up with a new line which is resonating, which is diverse faces do not make diverse voices. A lot of companies are saying, let's get people who have different looks. Let's get male and female and people of color and etc. and age. But then they don't create an environment where those people can actually speak up. So just having diverse faces is not the same as diverse voices. So unless people have a voice on the table, having a face on the table doesn't make sense.
When you say that, there's a lot of different directions. We could talk for hours about that particular topic. It makes me sad that diversity is how someone looks. But when we all judge people, okay, maybe initially we judge somebody, do they look like they're in our tribe or not? But when two people connect, if they have the same thinking, the same way to approach a problem or whatever, they'll end up connecting. It doesn't make a difference what their face looks like. So you're right. I think the way that we've gone in the last couple of years, putting so much emphasis on putting a rainbow room of faces in the room that could all end up thinking exactly the same is bizarre.
Yes, because there are two things that happen. You basically, many of them may come from the same background.
Same colleges, same whatever.
Colleges, etc., which is number one. But the other is all of us want to succeed and we don't want to sort of tell stuff that people may not like. So we all keep quiet. One of the interesting thoughts right now is there's a small sort of downside of a lot of the movements that are occurring all over. So one is obviously the diversity stuff. We have to make sure people can speak up versus not speak up. But now what we're basically happening is we have a lot of companies also become very sensitive to anybody saying anything. So in effect, people keep quiet because you can't voice something without sometimes people basically thinking that it's a form of harassment or microaggression or something of the sort. In an odd way, we are celebrating diversity in one way and eliminating diversity of thinking in another way.
One last final question here. You just said we all keep quiet. Well, clearly, anyone that listens to this conversation and they hear about you presenting to Amazon and what you said to people that worked at Amazon, you don't keep quiet. My question for you is, were you always like that? Or was there a pivot or a shift in your life at some point in time where you went from being the quiet guy to the guy that no longer cared about whether or not he got approval by playing along and towing the line, but then you became a guy who said, you know what, I'm going to speak the truth as I see it, and that's it. I'm going to roll with it. And when did that happen? How did that happen?
That happened over a course of a decade. So when I started my career, in fact, there's a story in the book where I was basically told that I was both too quiet and I was too Indian. My boss basically said, you will not succeed unless you change in the following ways. If that conversation had not happened, I would not have succeeded. But as I tell people, that conversation would be considered to be illegal today. And it wasn't ethnic profiling. He just basically said, you don't speak up, you keep quiet, you don't understand baseball, you don't understand American culture. This business is not only about being good at what you do, but it's about all these other things, like how you engage with people, etc. That was one part. But over the years, what I began to realize that there were things that I particularly liked doing, and sometimes those things, the early forms of digital, etc., were not necessarily what other people paid any attention to. Eventually, I combined my passion with rational reasons why what I was saying was right. What's very important is I didn't just blurt out shit. You can just say shit, and then after a couple of times, you just get flushed away. What I figured out over time was to do the following, which is, A, speak truthfully about what I believe, while at the same time having built a case for why I believe may be wrong. There's a conversation I have in my book called Build the Case for the Opposite of What You Think is True. What I began to realize is I could actually speak my mind, and I didn't look like I had become a lunatic because I understood the other point of view too. I also understood that 1 out of 3 times, and fortunately it's only been 1 out of 3 times and not 2 out of 3 times, I was wrong. But 2 out of 3 times when I speak up, I'm actually right. 1 out of 3 times, I'm not right. But because I know I may not be right and I've thought about the other perspective, the other people actually listen to me. Because you've got to remember something. It's not only speaking truth to power, it's making sure that those people are receptive. If I come to you and say, you suck, as the opening statement, I'm not going to get further from there. To a great extent, even when I spoke at Amazon, I basically said, I'm both a long-time early user of you, and as a consumer, I love you. However, that was really interesting. So I've learned not only both on how to build the case, but how to communicate it. It's like Mary Poppins, the old movie, you may remember this, which is a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down.
Such a great line, right?
Right.
One last thing I got to say to you. I've seen in your writings, it must have been in an interview, where you said when you were doing the book, you really wanted to have a book that you could open up to any chapter, no order. And that was exactly how I did my first book. And I didn't have any particular training or thought process to doing a book for the first time, but I just ended up going that same kind of path. I wanted people to just be able to open it at any point in time and just go. By the way, to add to that too, you also make the point that most business books today are really just one chapter. And that's so unfortunately true. And as a guy who sees a lot of business books, it might even be less than one chapter. It might be like one great sentence.
Yes. What tended to happen is, so even though I'm not a data guy because of my math background and because of my rational background, I asked a simple question. How many copies does an average nonfiction business book sell in the United States? That was the question I asked. The largest number I could get for an average nonfiction business book over its lifetime was 5,000. 5,000 copies is the average number of books a nonfiction book sells, which means obviously some sell much less than that because others sell hundreds of thousands. I said, why is it only 5,000? That's how I actually began to think about this book. And I came up with 3 reasons, or I discovered 3 reasons. I didn't come up. The first one was, no one ever asked you to write a book. A lot of nonfiction business books are vanity projects. Because today also in the world of self-publishing, sort of lack of soul, I can decide to go print a book, which is number one. One is nobody's asked me, I'm not solving any problem, I'm just writing something. The second, to the point you've just raised, most books basically it's a Harvard Business Review article that somebody said you should make into a book. It's basically an article that has been souffled into a book. It's all puffed up, but there's not much in there. That's this one chapter issue. The third is most of these books tend to basically be full of case studies, which are both outdated or irrelevant. In effect, you write a book that nobody's asked for that should actually have been an article and is full of irrelevant stuff, then obviously it doesn't sell. My hope for was, why don't I do something different? I might not sell either, but let me not follow that path. But one of it is we're living in an age where outside of when you're like a Beatles album where every song is good. If you remember the old compact disc, you said you had to buy the compact disc for just one good song. I said that age is over. I'm actually going to create a Spotify playlist where you can listen to any song in any order. It's not going to be a book of essays because a book of essays would be random. Instead, there will be, like a playlist, a theme that connects everything. The theme is, how do you combine the story and the spreadsheet? That's usually everything. It's the PowerPoint and the poetry. Too much math, too little meaning. It's all of that. The third is, I'm going to use anecdotes and stories, but no case studies, graphs, or charts. That is something that when I worked on it, and I was going to talk about to humans versus to any particular subsegment, Ken Auletta, the famous writer who's written my foreword in the New Yorker columnist, when I first told him what I was trying to do, he said, I don't know if you can do that. After I sent him the first draft, he said, you've actually done it. So hopefully your listeners will have an opportunity to go buy the book and see if it's actually happened or not.
Getting soul into the written word. That's the viral way that I think good books still proliferate. People read something, they kind of go, oh, that made me feel good. They tell their buddy, and boom, boom, boom.
That's the hope that we have for this book, because so far everyone who's read it says they like it. Obviously, when we have those crazy people, as you mentioned, on Amazon, they'll basically think that I'm the devil incarnate, but by which stage I will basically go completely analog and go off electric grid.
There you go. The book, Restoring the Soul of Business, Staying Human in the Age of Data. Where can we send people? Is there a website you want to drive people to?
The easiest way for anyone in the world is just to go to Amazon, since we talked about that.
Do you have a personal website beyond buying the book at Amazon? Is there a personal website you want to send people to?
The personal website is rishadtobaccowala.com. That's rishadtobaccowala.com. But if you go to Amazon and just put in RISHAD, the book shows up immediately.
Hey, I thank you for taking the time today. Fun chat.
Absolutely, and thank you for inviting me, and hopefully your listeners were not bored.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.